listeners, it's Jana. Welcome back to Grief Out Loud. And don't worry, today I'm back behind the host mic interviewing our guest, Dr. Jamie Eaddy, who also goes by Dr. J. Dr. J is a thanatologist, theologian, healer, author, and innovative educator. She's also the founder and principal of Thoughtful Transitions and the creative force behind the Ratchet Grief Project. What I love about this interview is how Dr. J challenges us to expand our understanding of grief, not just as something we feel when someone dies, but as our natural response to all kinds of losses, changes, and transitions. She talks about befriending grief, treating her as a companion who guides us towards what she calls our resurrection, helping us find our way back to ourselves as we figure out how to live with loss. We delve into her work around identifying how certain ways of grieving get labeled as unacceptable, particularly for communities and individuals who experience various forms of oppression and marginalization. Through her Ratchet Grief Project, she's creating spaces where people can be authentic in their grief expression without trying to conform to narrow expectations for how it should look. This is a conversation about lineage, about survival, about the courage to reclaim parts of ourselves that we may have left behind, and about recognizing that grief isn't our enemy. She is a guide helping us to find our way forward. Okay, here's our conversation. Dr. J, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
How do you want to introduce yourself today?
Oh, yes, thank you. So this is how I introduce myself to most groups of people, to most people. I say I am the granddaughter of Alberta Brown, the cousin of Pauline Bennett, the niece of Salam Brown. My grandmother, my cousin, and my uncle transitioned in 1995, 1989, and 2024, respectively. But they are still three of the most influential people in my world. So when you meet me, you meet them. I am a good girlfriend. I'm a good listener. And I think I'm like a part-time comedian. So that's how I tell people, I think we ought to have some laughter and joy in life, even in the midst of loss. So I always say I'm a comedian because I do like to laugh at myself even, but that's who I am. I'm Alberta's granddaughter and a good friend and a good listener.
Well, that makes me even more excited for our conversation today in that. And I know we're going to talk a lot about your professional work. And you've already sort of introduced us to the personal experiences with grief with your grandmother and your cousin and your uncle. And I wondered if you could share a little bit more maybe about who they were and how their deaths have shaped the choices you've made in your career.
Yeah. So thinking about my cousin Pauline first, because she was one of the first deaths that I experienced in a family setting. And my family didn't have a lot of language. So part of what I do today is help people sort of find their language, right? Because it's so important for me to help folks find language. So when my cousin Pauline died, in a family that didn't have a lot of language, not a lot of ritual, but what I saw was that a family could be present at someone's death. So that told me early on, 12, 13 years old, that death didn't have to be something that took place over there, right? It didn't have to be something that, family, friends were not a part of. That although my cousin was dying, she was still living and she was still family. And we didn't have to ignore her as she was going through her dying experience. So that really helps me in my professional world, helping others recognize that they too can be present. And then my grandmother's death in 1995, I learned so much about myself with my grandmother's death. It took me 20 years to go back to her house. So I tell people that even one who does this work, right? And I've been doing the work for almost close to 3 decades, that it still took 20 years to go back to the house. The house is part of the family. I could not go in because I was like, this is my grandmother's house and she's not here. So that really helped me see that the grief journey is a lifetime, that there are things that you might move through rather quickly, but there are some other things that take some time, and to be gentle with people as they find their way in their time through the grief process. But both my grandmother, my cousin, and my uncle really helped me see that I didn't have to be afraid of death and dying, and I didn't have to be afraid of grief. that grief was not my enemy, that I call grief she, right? She was a friend that I could journey with. She was guiding me on life's journey. And that helps me as a professor. So I also teach pastoral care and counseling in theological education. And I'm the director of counseling and wellness for an anti violence organization in Philadelphia who supports families of murder victims of all things. And so I'm working in all of these spaces, and I recognize that each grief experience is its own experience. And I think learning from how I move through those deaths differently and how everyone in our family moved through them differently really helps me as I join others in moving with and through their grieving moments too.
Yeah, so it really seems like that understanding that as someone is dying, they can continue to be an integrated part of our lives and our experiences, to recognize that grief has its own wily timeline and that everyone's grief is going to show up in its own unique format for them, even within the community or within the family. Like those three things
Yeah.
seem to really undergird a lot of the work that you do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
When you're supporting someone or leading a community conversation or just educating folks,
Mhm.
how do you describe and define grief? It's something people ask me all the time. I hate answering it, but I thought you might enjoy answering that question.
I do enjoy answering the question. One, because so many folks that I join in conversation with have only understood grief as what they feel when, and I always say it like when Big Mama dies, right? When Pop Pop dies, when Big Mama dies, that feeling that they have is grief. That's how most folks that I encounter first understand grief. And some, that's all they understand about grief. And so I say that's very important. Big Mama's death and your grief is very important. But I want to expand our awareness around grief to grief is this emotion, right? But grief is also, or grieving is this process. It is our natural response to loss, change, transition, unmet expectations, unrealized dreams, and shattered assumptions. And so when I give a definition, describe grief for folks, I use that whole thing. And so even if I'm teaching a class, I'll say grief is what? Our natural response to loss, change, transition, unmet expectations, unrealized dreams, shattered assumptions. So by the end of class, when I say, because grief is, the class will say loss, change, like they pick it up and start to see how, oh, that was grief. Oh, right. And so that's why, and I'm sure others have described it similarly. And this is not new work that we're doing, but that is my description for grief. And I'll say, so this natural response to loss, change, transition, unmet expectations, unrealized dreams, shattered assumptions. And she is a friend who guides us toward our resurrection. And I use resurrection sort of as when we experience a loss, often, depending on the loss, but it feels like we died there too, right? So sometimes if it's one of our people, parent, friend, it feels like a part of us dies. If it is a relationship that ends, it feels like a part of us died. And what does it mean to sort of get up from those death moments that we encounter in life? And I say, grief, she is the one, this process, she helps us find our way back to our feet again, so that we can move into our future, whatever that is going to be. So that's kind of how I describe grief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm grateful because I share a similar definition. When people ask me, I'm like, it's a reaction to anything that's different or changing in your life. It's not just the death of someone. And the other piece of that, as you're talking, I'm like, oh, so often people think of grief as this thing that comes into your life when a loss occurs, and it's something to get away from. And the way you're describing it is now your companion to help you to figure out how to live without. And if we
Yeah.
get rid of grief, we lose our guide for how to live without.
Yes. She is our guide. And so many, because the work I do is in community, it's individuals, it's through education. And sometimes I meet folks who say they're stuck, right? And we talk about how have we treated grief? Like how have we treated her? Do we push her away? Do we not? She is helping you reorient yourself into this new world that you are now sort of been placed in. And so, yeah, she is friend. And so when I teach courses, sometimes it's befriending grief. What does it mean to develop an intimate relationship with her that you can call her and talk to her and help her, or she can help you move into this new world wholly, right? Whole into this new world. Yeah.
It seems like it's connected to the shift that happened in the field. I'm terrible with dates, but back in the day, a shift happened where it was like we no longer have to just completely cut off our relationship with the person or the place or the pet that we have lost. We get to continue that relationship. And it seems like you are adding on to that. We also get to have an ongoing relationship with grief along
Yes.
with our person, place, or thing.
Yeah, and one of my teachers, not so much around grief, but just in life, Dr. Mama Itihari Ture, one of my elders, we talk about what sort of African cosmologies and African thoughts about being in touch with the dead, right? And so in this field, as you said, there was a shift that said you don't have to let go of the person who's no longer with you physically. If I look at, say, the Dogon people, if I look at folks from Senegal or Nigeria, if I look at Yoruba as sort of a cultural practice, this has been in place, and it's not just African, right? This is other cultures as well, but this has been in place for a long time. This we won't disconnect from ancestor. That there is this belief that even now that every one of my ancestors is still in me, right? So that's 4,094 people. If you look at sort of the number of generations, right, between me and them, that my people are still with me, they're still in me, and I don't have to disconnect from them, even if they are not here physically. So yes, even though the field sort of started talking a little bit differently about these continuing bonds, culturally, there were practices that indigenous, African, and others who do have an altar, right, where they stay in touch with auntie who transitioned 25 years ago, where they do ask for guidance from elders who are no longer here to what move is my next move? How do I do this? And so yeah, that way that we get to continue to introduce ourselves as Alberta's granddaughter, even though she's not here. That is a way of continuing this relationship with my people who are very dear to me. So yeah, I know our field. I think this field and other fields sort of catch up to what we know in our bones,
Mm.
right? We know these things in our bones, and then we start to put some science and some research behind it.
And just recognizing like thousands of years of knowledge and practice that went on long before modern day grief and bereavement came in and said, here's how it works.
Yes, yes, yeah, definitely.
You've also written and talked about the idea of acceptable or unacceptable grief, especially in communities that are historically and currently experiencing marginalization and oppression. And what does that mean and how does that play out?
Yes, thank you for that. I have what we call the Ratchet Grief Project. Now, I have to tell everyone, my mother hates that I use the term ratchet, but I told her there's a reason. There's a reason I use ratchet. I use ratchets because when you think about what is acceptable, what is sort of classy, what we allow into a space, it is a very limited view of who can grieve, how they can grieve, what they are to grieve, like what's acceptable around grief. And that is harmful for so many people's grief experience. I think about a couple of months ago, I did some workshops for queer youth that were grieving. And I think about if we say this is the only way your grief can look, how many people can't fit into that particular box? And if I am telling you that your grief must look like that and you can't fit into that box, here are some things you might do. You might sort of cut off parts of yourself in order to grieve the way we say is acceptable. And that's harmful, right? And so this idea of making space for what some might see as ratchet, what some might see as uncouth, what some might see as that's too loud, but it has a space in my grieving process. I want to make sure that we bring that to the world's attention, really. I want to make sure that we expand ourselves so that we don't have an expectation that your grief must look exactly like mine. And what you grieve is what I grieve. And how you, right? I want to make sure that we do that kind of work in the world. I think that's the holy, and I say holy, not so much religious, but that's the sacred work. The sacred grief work is making sure that folks whose experiences and whose lives have been marginalized, that they are seen, and that what feels um, natural to their bones, what feels like it's a part of them, that it has space without judgment and without stigma and shame. So that's such an important part of my work. And we have these ratchet grief conversations and healing circles, and people get to come and do and be who and what they are. And I'll even say this, that includes, sometimes we're dancing. And I think about my mother and her friends, how they hated the way we danced. And, when I was growing up, it just bothered them so much because it didn't look like what they did. So there are times when I'm thinking, oh my God, that looks like, that looks a mess to me. And that's what you need. So how can I help give you what you need so that your experience feels healing and helpful? And I'm not trying to get you to live into typically this sort of heteronormative white male cisgender kind of expectation. This is what it looks like. So that's we need to acceptable this is mine. It doesn't matter if other people see it or validate it, but it would be great if we could look at everybody and say, I see you in your experience. Yeah.
Is there an example of a way you've seen a community that you work with try to fit into that model of, like you said, like white, cisgender, mostly male way of grieving, whatever that is? Like, have you seen folks
Right.
like what that looks like when they're trying to fit into that?
Yeah. So one of the things is so many people have been socialized to disconnect from their emotions, right? So to not feel, and we think sort of this sort of stoic approach to my grief. I don't have to cry. I don't have to mourn outwardly, that it doesn't have to be loud is one of those ways that we are trying to sort of silence the voices and the tears. And that's beyond sort of white male cisgender heteronormative kind of thing. That's really just we are uncomfortable with emotion, and so we create space for people to grieve, but it can't be too loud. You can't fall apart. That's another piece, right? So those are some of the things. And then here's one that comes with um, sort of planning for funerals. Now, there was a time when funerals, memorial services, whatever sort of disposition that you're using, how you honor that, whatever ritual that is, there was a day when you would know that this family is preparing for, I'll say, a homegoing service, right? A funeral service. And families would give money. They would put a few dollars in a card and they would go to the house and they would drop this off, right? Um, Today, things have changed where maybe we're not dropping off money in a card, but people have a GoFundMe. Now, we shame people for having a GoFundMe to ask for support in performing this ritual. But that ritual and the way we're supporting has been done for decades. However, now that technology allows us to do it with a GoFundMe, we think that's not the same kind of community support. And so I'll see people who need support, but will refuse to, say, ask for it in ways that maybe spotlight them because they're not comfortable with folks knowing that they need support. When people knew you needed support before, they would drop off the cards. This time it comes from a GoFundMe. So those are just a couple of ways that I think trying to fit into what we think is acceptable to others prevents us from moving through our grief process in ways that are helpful and healing for us. But I think the biggest thing, though, is the emotion. is trying to keep it together. And I don't really know what keeping it together does, but trying to keep it together because we don't want to be too loud. We don't want to bring attention to us. And I do think that's trying to fit into a view of that forces people to try to fit into this expectation of how they should respond to the death of their loved one, that it doesn't take all that. And some of that is even religious expectation, right? This, depending on your faith tradition, if you believe that the person has gone to a better place, then you are not supposed to be sad. And so I'm supposed to erase my sadness because person X has gone to another place. And I think trying to fit into those kinds of things prevents us from really sitting with the very real emotion associated with the loss. And sitting with that helps us move into our new reality. And so I think we're cutting people off in that way.
When I think too about the eons of expectation around not so much, well, productivity, but functioning, as I put in quotes, around people, I think we just have this sense I'm either going to feel feelings or I'm going to be okay and be able to like make breakfast for the kids.
Right.
And we don't have a lot of experience of like, I can feel my feelings and I can maybe still make breakfast for my kids. And so I just think about that piece and sometimes that's conscious and sometimes that's really unconscious.
Yeah, definitely. I love that example because the truth is, in some ways, we have to kind of figure out how to be in both worlds, how to be in sort of this loss orientation where we are feeling sad and all of the feelings, and sort of my future, what's happening today, how do I live at the same time? That might mean making breakfast. Yeah. And so, oh yeah, that's just a great example as well. Yes.
And the way that economics plays into that role of folks who have maybe a job that allows them to take 6 weeks to 2 months off, or you have a job where you get an hour and then you got to get back to work because you have shift work, or you don't have any bereavement leave, or any of those things, or you just don't have the resources to take time off of work to be in those feelings in a little bit more expansive way.
Yeah, I think about the dimensions of wellness, right? And so anytime I talk grief and loss with folks, I talk about financially, loss impacts us, right? And so as you mentioned, I am privileged in that I can take whatever time I need. Jamie can take whatever time she needs. That's not everybody's story. And recognizing that you may not be as productive. So even if you do go back to work, whatever you did before, if you were able to do 10 in an hour, whatever that looks like, you might be down to 7 because there is this way that grief impacts our bodies, right? And so maybe you're not as quick. Maybe you are a little bit fatigued, and we don't create space for that either. But naming the very real, what I think is sort of injustice around loss in the workspace, with folks having to go right back to work, expected to perform at level, right? Whatever that level was, expected to perform at level. You've had your 3 days and now be present in today. I just think that's such an injustice, that if you have privilege, you get the space to do and be in your grief. And if you don't, you have to swallow it and keep it moving. And too many people in the world have had to swallow it for a long time.
We've talked quite a bit about this already, of sort of these narratives that contribute to people's grief being dismissed or being harmed in their grief. I was curious if there's others that come to mind. And then the second part of that is, are there ways that you've had to work personally to unravel the impact of those narratives in your own life?
Absolutely. So first, I just think about Shanika Walker Barnes wrote a book, Strong Black Woman, One Word. And the way this sort of the burden of strength, and this way that strength only has one look. And so even with grief, thinking about how strength looks one way, strength looks like no tears, strength looks like showing back up to work the next day after a surgery. Yeah, Dr. Yolanda Pierce wrote about a woman who had sort of horrible fibroids, and she was in tremendous pain. But you know what? Family always comes over for Sunday dinner. And so rather than maybe take some medication and lie down, she's going to stand in excruciating pain to prepare Sunday dinner, right? These ways that you've been told to persevere, to press your way, almost as if you don't deserve the space to feel anything else. So when I think about grief, I do think about particularly Black women, because that's a large group that I work with, is the ways that Black women have had to sort of swallow, have had to put it to the side in order to continue functioning for the world, right? To continue to perform. And that might mean not addressing your own sadness, not addressing the very real way that this particular loss has taken from you, right? Has taken energy, has stopped you from dreaming, has, like, we are not allowed to sit with that. We must continue to show up, to perform strength. And I swallowed that as a child. I never saw my grandmother cry, my favorite person in the world. And I didn't realize I never saw her cry until a couple of years ago. And I was like, certainly there were things that occurred that one might think to pause and shed a few tears was, I'm saying appropriate, but might have been warranted. But I never saw her cry. And I think about how I moved through life also not crying for a significant period of time because I thought that made me weak. And grief, I can't let grief make me weak. I must show that I am strong, that I must persevere. And I am not the only one that has swallowed that. And it took some time for me to recognize that, one, I had to redefine what it meant to be strong. And so strength is not only being able to sort of stand with your back straight without crying. Strength is also allowing your tears to fall and you falling onto your knees and weeping. Like, both of those demand strength from us. And I am going to validate this strength that allows me to be with my feelings, to be with my emotions, to not cut off parts of myself in order to sort of satisfy the expectations of other folks. So that kind of narrative, narratives, particularly in my family, I think about some of the men in my family, and I don't typically think binary, but if I think about the ways we were raised, it was that men needed to perform their grief in a particular way. That included not crying, not being overly, as I quote, overly emotional, right? Like these were, you show up this way, they show up this way. I think those were the narratives that were sort of the hardest to unravel because they show up in almost everything, right? That it was really a dismantling of what it meant to be human. And I started to think about, in my humanity, I am allowed and have access to all of the emotions, and they might look different. And so I'm going to allow myself to feel all of those emotions. Whereas the box that I was trying to fit in, or the narrative that I was given before, was that these three emotions are the ones you're allowed to feel. And outside of that, you cannot feel those things. Those are some of the narratives. I think narratives even around how we honor people's deaths is something I've had to think about. And like, what do you want to happen when you die? And do you do what everybody else does and everybody says this is the only way, or might you get cremated? Might you be cremated? Might you want? So those kinds of things go through my mind too, in terms of ways that I've had to unlearn um, what others may have seen as acceptable. I had to ask questions. Who told you that? Why? Well, who taught you that and why? In order to really unearth a lot of what we are living into is someone else's expectation around how one is to behave. And you got to really get underneath to figure out what's your way. So those are a couple of things I've had to unlearn over time. Yeah.
It's interesting. We started our conversation from this place of lineage, acknowledging your lineage. And I really love the idea of first becoming aware of the expectations that we have inherited or just carried forward. So naming them, seeing them, and then tracing their lineage back. Like, where did this come from? How did I come to believe this? Do I want to continue to believe this? So yeah, I appreciate that thread coming through. And I was thinking too about this idea of strength, because I was thinking about weightlifting, right? Because I'm a woman of middle age and we got to lift weights. And so I've been thinking about that a lot. And we think about the way people talk about strength that way is as though if you're strong enough, you will be unaffected by.
Yes.
But if I watch somebody in a weightlifting competition, they do not appear unaffected by the weight that they are now able to lift and carry. They make noises, they get sweaty, they throw things around. And so moving away from this idea of like strong to me is like, how do I continue to be in my life carrying things, moving things that are hard versus just I'm unaffected by that. I'm impenetrable.
Yeah. And it's such a big difference because we are not impenetrable first. And so what does it mean to honor that? Like, I want to honor that I am strong and that there are some things that I can carry that it might take all of my energy. There's some things I can carry that, guess what? The only reason I can carry this is because the community is with me in the carrying, right? There are some things that are not meant to be carried solo. And so you're really just reevaluating what I've learned about strength. And I think about this. This is so important to me. I don't shame my mother or my father. I don't shame my grandparents and my ancestors who taught who taught me how to be in the world. I recognize that some of what they learned was out of survival, right? So some of the ways that they learned how to move through their grief was out of survival. They could not show emotion because that might put them in danger. And so I recognize that. And so I ask myself, is that appropriate for me today? I can honor and I'm grateful that they did what was necessary, even as they grieved, to survive, because that's why I'm here. But now I get to say that no longer works. Let's think of what might work better, what might be more appropriate, what is beneficial today. And so that unlearning, and I want all of us to journey in that way, right? To practice this unlearning, but showing appreciation for those who were before us, because they did what they did for a reason. Like, there was a reason. And so honoring that, and also saying, but I can grieve differently today. And so leaning into that too.
And to recognize that oftentimes the work that other generations have done lets us get to a place of affording space to question and wonder, do I need to update this system?
Yes. Yeah, that's it.
You've worked with, you've said you've been in this field for almost 3 decades, and you've worked with so many communities over the years. What are you currently hearing and seeing come up around grief? And it feels weird to be like a trend. I don't really mean that, but like, what are some of the themes, the conversations, the fears that seem very current day to you?
Yeah. So first I want to name, I also do work sort of as a death doula, a death guide. And so this modern day death doula, right, is certainly on the rise. And you and I both know that if we trace our lineage back a few generations, someone in our family probably had that role. They didn't call it a death doula, but they knew what it meant when they could look at somebody and see that something was happening. They had that gift, and they sat by bedsides, and they did rituals, and they made little balms for them, and they made soups and tinctures for. So we know that there's someone in our families who probably had that role. Today, I see this sort of rising death doula who also does grief work, right? Showing up in lots of places. I'm always cautious because most of the death doulas that I see in mainstream getting sort of marketing and advertising and space are white women, second career white women. And so I'm seeing that as a big thing happening. And beyond that, grief is really popular today. This is what makes it so. Everyone wants to talk grief, and so I hope no one gets upset with me. I'm okay if you do. We can talk about it. I am also seeing that because grief is popular, and everyone wants to talk grief, that there are a lot of voices around grief that will start a podcast, right? That will write a book. And it's very superficial. It's not, it's they had one conversation on grief and now they've gone to do a podcast. And so I am also seeing, while I think this grief awareness, it also means that we're becoming more aware of grief as individuals and a society. I really do believe that there's still a lot of work to do, but we are becoming more aware of grief. In that awareness is also this trend to, oh, I'm going to do that. And in some ways, I would say that there is both learning and experience that one might also invest themselves in to do this kind of work. So I'm seeing that the awareness around grief is growing. Roles like death doulas are growing. People who are therapists and other doctors are finding um, education around grief to be helpful in their work. So I'm seeing, for me, when I'm training, a lot of professionals come my way because they're trying. So I'm seeing this, um, but I'm also seeing this sort of widespread grief that people are feeling, sort of around political climates and things like that, that we are not making the kind of space for that I believe we need to make space for, because we have yet to really connect that kind of loss to grief. Like it seems like something different. So I'm seeing that we are recognizing, at least grief workers, that there's still so many ways that folks are grieving. And while our awareness of grief is growing, there's still a lot of pockets that need some more work.
I really appreciate you sharing about that kind of ambivalence around it, right? Like, one, grief, almost everyone can touch into some personal grief experience. So as grief becomes more popular or okay to talk about, I can see so many folks being like, I have something to contribute. Like, I have a story to tell.
Yes.
And part of me is like, yes, it's like the liberation of grief for all. Like, you all
Yes.
have it and now you get to talk about it. And then the other piece of that is, if there's so many voices in the sphere, again, going back to maybe that idea of lineage, like, what are some of the other like trainings? What are you rooting that experience in? If you are now giving suggestions or supporting others versus just a place to share your story that someone might take something from it, right? That's a little what I'm sitting with as you were saying that.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll say this. One thing I'm seeing as well in the grief space is that people are doing a lot of ancestral work around grief. And this is with various populations. They are really trying to understand what grief practices existed before they got here. Not my grandmother, but what did her great grandmother do? What were their practices? So I'm seeing a lot of grief work that is going, they're really trying to get to sort of what was done before. I know we have science and we have a lot of research today, but what was also done? Let me hear the voices of my elders and see what they've done and how that can still be beneficial. So I'm seeing a lot of that. And the last thing I'll say is, I'm also seeing a lot of folks do body work, recognizing just the kind of toll that loss, disruption, change might have on your physical body, and not disconnecting that from grief work. So positive trend for me there is folks are really expanding the way they engage this work too.
I've also been appreciating more conversations around non-death loss. I mean, in our program, we're very focused on bereavement or someone who has an advanced serious illness, but we are starting to work more in this idea of non-death loss and letting people own the word grief when it comes to that. And that's what I see as another big trend
Yeah.
in a positive way, again, to like spread that grief awareness and have people feel legitimate in their reactions to experiences of loss that aren't necessarily related to the death of a person.
Yeah. And that is probably 75% of my work today is non-death loss. When we talk about it, we say everything from it's like death, dreams, and divorce. Dreams that did not come true, that you were holding on to, relationships that ended. We did a whole series on these not pod series, but like sort of healing circles on hair loss. In 2022, all of my hair fell out, and that was hard for me. Now, I'm saying this as one who has had a almost shaved head, like really, really close cut. So hair has never been something that I was like, oh no, my hair, right? At least I didn't think so. But I lost agency when it fell out, and I didn't give it permission to go. It sounded so silly, but I was like, that's not silly. That is a loss that I had to sit with and process. And so most of my work is really around losses associated with identity. Who am I now that this dream that I've been holding on to, this identity that I've tried to live into, it's starting to shatter. Who am I now that I realize that I won't have children? And I've been hoping for children. What does it mean that I am aging and I'm still here, but I can't do the things? My mobility has changed. So most of my loss is non-death related loss. Even though I do some homicide work and loss in that space, but most of my work is non-death related loss. And as you said, being people realizing, oh my gosh, that's grief. Helping someone see that the relationship that ended, that they knew they needed to get out of, but they still feel this thing, helping them sit with the loss of connection, even with someone that you needed to disconnect from. Like that, those kinds of healing and helpful conversations are freeing. And so that is such a beautiful trend that more people are talking about it, sort of as you like legitimizing it. But that's been the source of my work. It's been the dreams that did not come true. It's been the ways you've been ostracized in community. It's been the parents not accepting your identity. And so you trying to make your way through the world. Those are the losses that I've journeyed with people most. Yeah.
What do you think people continue to not understand or purposely misunderstand about the experience of being Black and grieving here in the United States?
Yeah. There is this unreasonable expectation about sort of Black strength and the expectation of Black disembodiment, right? That we are not, you are not expected to be whole being, to feel that when losses occur, I mean, so what, right? So this way that loss is expected for you. And since loss is expected, you really ought to be able to move through it differently. I also think that, particularly in our society, we don't realize just how much loss Black folks experience at the hands of whiteness, at the hands of systems, that it's not just that your loved one has died. It is that you've not been allowed to live fully embodied because you make people afraid. And I'm saying you make people afraid, but that people are I take some of my brothers, for example, that there is this way that they are not allowed to live into their full identity because that threatens systems, that then causes grief because I want to live, I want to survive, I want to go home to my families and my children. And so I'm willing to cut off parts of myself in order to go into a world and stay alive. And so I think that for me, the we don't recognize just how much historical and intergenerational and anticipatory, all these ways that we understand grief, we don't recognize how much of that has been heaped upon Black bodies, and that supporting structures that might give them space to grieve don't exist, not the way they do for other communities. And so yeah, the way that, say, racism and sexism causes grief, and it doesn't just cause grief for me, that grief then impacts generations, right? And so that is the piece for me that I don't think um, that we recognize. I don't think when I can think of an older gentleman who found out that his cancer was terminal, and I never say people's names. This was a few years ago. But in having conversations with him, as he reminisced about his childhood and his young adulthood, the theme that was there was that he could never be himself because he didn't want to make other people scared. Because his father got into trouble because he made people scared. And so he made himself small throughout his life to protect himself. So, what does it mean to have to make yourself small, to not be able to be fully embodied? How much grief do you carry because you are not able to live as your whole self? And that is what I believe happens with people of African descent, that they are forced, as Melissa Harris Perry talks about, sort of to walk into a room and sort of have to bend your body in order to fit. And over the years, having a bent body takes its toll on you. And you get blamed at the end because you need support, because having a bent body now comes with some health ailments, but they don't realize that you had to bend your body because that was the only way you were safe in the space. And the grief that comes from having to make decisions to live, which means I might bend my body, even though I know bending my body is going to cause me trouble in the long run, and that my child is going to see me bending my body. And I want to show my child a different kind of strength, but I want to stay alive. So I'm going to bend my body. And the grief that I now feel for having bent my body, the grief that I feel once the bent body needs support and I don't have the support I need, the grief I feel because now my child looks at me and says, Mom, why did you bend your body all those years? Those are the stories that I say my siblings, those are the stories that my kinfolk are living with. And so, yeah, the grief is in our bones, the grief is in our stories, the grief is in my throat. And that grief impacts my ability to live well. That there is some sickness that I might have in my body because I have been forced to bend over for so long, that sickness was how my body responded to the not being able to live and walk upright in the world because I'm Black.
Seems like it circles back to what you were sharing about your parents and your grandparents, and recognizing that the ways that they decided grief was or wasn't acceptable was really rooted in these contextual imperatives that were really connected to survival.
Yeah. It is this sort of perpetual cycle, right? It is that I bend or I do what's necessary to survive, which invites sort of loss and change and transition into my world, invites grief, and and that's the cycle. I survived. Now you bend to survive. Like, it is this way that I'm. If I survive, this is the grief I've had to invite into my world, but I did it to survive. And now that I've survived, it is just a cycle of, for me, a cycle of grief. So, yeah.
And then when someone doesn't survive, when their body does stop working, it
Mm-hmm.
makes so much sense that the people around them are grieving in a particular way because they have also been socialized in this same cycle of bending.
Yeah. 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 That's why I try not to shame. I really have worked hard to honor ways that my loved ones have had to bend, ways that, and I say loved ones, just my people and folks in general, ways that folks see the need to bend today, and I'm using bend, right? But folks see the need to limit parts of themselves, to become small. Because I see survival and I understand that we want to live. And sometimes it's I would rather live even if I know that parts of me have to die in order to do so. And I can't judge you for that because I know that there are times that I've had to choose to live even if a part of me had to die. Now, hopefully, at least the work I'm doing, I try to go back and reclaim those parts and and still, I recognize that many of us have had to do that in order to survive.
This is kind of a weird question to end on, but is there a part that you've most recently reconnected with or reclaimed?
Most recently, oh, that's such a great question. If I can do two things. In 2019, I reconnected with joy in a way that I had not known. If you had asked me up to 2019 to tell you about my life, I would begin the story talking about being a survivor of early childhood abuse in our big, broad family and intimate partner violence in our broad family. I would just talk about how, my family had these troubles and here I go, I survived. And it was my cousin's birthday and I wanted to post a picture of us on Facebook. So I found a picture when we were younger, and it was just a really cute picture, and I was smiling in the picture. And in that moment, I talk about sort of ancestors. Someone said to me, like, do you see the joy? And I'm 5 years old in this picture. And it was like, do you see the joy? Like you left that joy some time ago. That so much loss and change and transition that the joy, she still that 5 year old you still had the joy back there because that's where you left it. And so I had to go back and just really do some work. I call it about just rewinding work, where you kind of got to rewind the tape back and pause it there and do some work. And I had to do that to reclaim joy. Now I believe me and joy have become acquainted in ways that while loss may I might not look joyful in this moment, but my joy is deeply rooted in my bones now because I went back to get it. That's one. And the second sort of part of me that I reclaimed, I am recently divorced. And I'm almost 50-year-old woman, so like menopause, all these things, and my body, I became different, and so I felt like I was not myself. And so I had to go back and reclaim me, which meant like really sitting with the fact that we do change, we do age. It was this work of really sitting with the me that was becoming, not shaming the me that was becoming because I had gotten so used to the me of the past. But I had to go back to have that conversation to sort of reclaim me and always bring me forward. And that me might have many iterations in the next several years, but I can hold on to me. I didn't have to leave me back with, you know, 2020, 2021 Jamie. That me, that the me, my identity, I could bring her forward even in a new body. So those are two of the ways that I had to sort of go back and claim parts, right? My joy is a part of me. I had to go back and sit with why I left joy there, what loss happened right there that made me deposit the joy. I had to go back and have that conversation. I think that is the one of the most life changing things that's really ever happened for me was to go back and reclaim joy that I lost as a result of loss.
And now I have this, I can't stop picturing you like with your team. Now you have your team, like your bench is deeper. So
Yes.
as you move forward, you have grief that goes with you. She's with you always. Now you've got joy on that team. You've got yourself on that team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, wow, what a difference that makes to think
Oh,
that you have backup that's always going with you with grief. And the grief is not going to eclipse those other parts of yourself.
Yeah, always going with me. Such a beautiful visual. Yep.
Well, Dr. J, we have lots more to discuss. And also, I want to be respectful of your time. Listeners now who want to hear more from you and connect with your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, thoughtfultransitions.org. Thoughtful Transitions is our organization. We provide grief education and support. We train leaders. We offer children's groups, just anything from death to dreams to divorce, you name it, as long as grief is there and we know grief is everywhere, we show up. And also the Ratchet Grief Project, which is our conversations. And I know I talked about podcasts, but it is going to be a podcast as well. And that'll launch this fall. And so you'll be able to hear that. And then drjamieeaddy.com is where you can just go find me and then keep up with wherever I'm going to be in the world. And yeah, I love just meeting new folks and engaging in new ways. And so I hope folks connect with us.
Well, Dr. J, thank you for making time to talk with me and to share with our listeners. I'm just very grateful for your time today.
Yeah, and thank you. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. And just this was really helpful and healing for me too. So thank you.
And listeners out there, I know you know I say this every single time, but thank you for being part of our community, for making the show mean something, for sharing episodes with people who might be interested in what we are talking about here. If you want to talk to me directly, you can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. It's dougy.org. It's also the main website for Dougy Center, where you can find free downloadable resources, tip sheets, activity sheets, information about our local programming, and of course, every episode of Grief Out Loud. I'm always excited to share that the podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Grief Out Loud is a production of Dougy Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.